Okay.
Okay.
So the other module Ainsley mentioned was supply chain finance. I'm going to slide one quick diagram over here just for people not overly familiar with how supply chain finance works. But basically, what you're doing is setting up these supply chain finance providers. Like Ainsley said, there are companies kind of dedicated to that purpose, like a Prime Revenue, and then there are also banks that just provide that as a service. But the general flow of things kind of works the same way, in that whenever I create an invoice and I'm going to kind of, if you will, farm it out to the supply chain finance provider, then we automatically ship that invoice in a provider specific format. We ship that to them. This usually these providers have a platform where the uh, the the vendor you're trying to pay basically is signing on to their platforms and signing up for some kind of a early pay discount from this provider. So the provider is responsible for kind of working, whatever those discounts or deals are with this, um, with the eventual vendor. But for us, all we know is that we ship this off to them and we're still going to owe that amount to this provider on the regular due date. So if the supply chain provider worked out a deal where they basically paid your vendor early at a discount, that doesn't really affect your terms. Your terms are always going to be the original terms with the original amount to the provider. So again, that whole kind of piece is not really shown on here, but the provider usually has a platform where these vendors are signing on and working out these early pay terms. But from our standpoint, some of the providers will send an acknowledgement back that they got this file we sent them, and I'll show how that works. Some of the providers will send a settlement file back that says, hey, you sent me this a month ago, now it's due, so your remit payment on this due date. And some don't do either of those. Some providers will simply just assume that you are going to pay them on the due date. And again, whatever deal they worked out with your eventual vendor is really irrelevant. On the original due date, you're going to owe them. So we try to build all that functionality in. You'll see there's optional steps where things may or may not be coming back from the bank because these providers all work a little bit differently. But eventually, we are paying the provider's bank account. Again, the provider, the supply chain finance provider, is really the one settling with the vendor. We're always just paying them on their original due date. So the idea of this is to have this invoice go out to the provider early, and then we will leave the invoice and the payable under the normal vendor for the whole length of the term. And then at the very last minute, we just kind of switch the payable from the regular vendor to the provider, because now we're going to be in the provider instead. So the way it sets up in here is under favorites here. Hopefully I got it. So we have these supply chain finance providers. They're really just set up of a vendor. So this is really just a vendor dropdown that we're setting up because that's who we're paying. So this is a guy we want to set up with a bank account, or maybe it's a check. Most likely it's an electronic type of payment we're eventually going to pay them with. And then this method of payment. So this is what identifies what invoices we want to ship off to this provider. So we want to identify, if this is for Prime Revenue, for instance, we might have a method of payment called Prime. And then anytime an invoice gets created that is of a Prime method of payment, we ship it off to them. We know that really the terms for these are just, net on the due date. The settlement file based. So there's a couple ways I mentioned. Some providers will actually send me an acknowledgement when the due date comes near. So 2 or 3 days before these invoices become due, they'll send me a reminder basically back, and we'll read that file in, and based on that, generate a payable to them. The others are just due date based, where they assume since you sent them in the first place that you know when they're due and that you're just going to remit on the due date. And then others really kind of let the payable remain with the original vendor. And then what you really kind of end up doing there is on those original vendors for the vendor bank account, you set up all the vendor bank accounts to really point to this this guy's bank account. But again, try to be pretty flexible with that in terms of the setup, and because we know there's kind of different back and forth that happens based on that on that interaction with the provider, or based on which the provider is. So I would create an invoice. We won't go through that process here. I created some earlier. So we have a create and send, which normally this would probably be happening automatic. There really would hopefully not be a good reason to be out here a lot because if we're just shipping off invoices every day, again, we would hope not to have to be out here and kind of manually do that process. Really, we just normally set that up to say at end of every day, any invoices we made for, let's say, prime revenue, that we're going to ship those invoices off to them with their respective due dates. But again, we try to make this sort of similar to the mold that we have for a lot of our other things, so that the screens will look familiar and kind of cut down on the training. But you can, of course, see what has gone out. From this screen, you could see if a settlement came back in. So you can see that we settled something. There's for the acknowledgements coming back in and for the settlements, there are screens to go to and look at how those settlements worked out. So when a settlement comes in, if something doesn't match what we sent out, so let's say I sent an invoice out to a provider, meanwhile there was something issued against that to maybe reduce the balance or whatever, and the provider wasn't made aware, then we will have a mismatch in terms of what we owe and what we thought the provider thinks. So we'll set those to needs reviewed or whatever. On the detail, we can see what has happened. This one needed reviewed, but I went in and kind of figured out the differences there. But basically what it's going to do is at the end of this process, create a payment journal to really clear out the original payment to the original vendor. The offset that though is really just going to be a clearing account, and then we'll regenerate an invoice for the supply chain finance provider. So basically, like I said earlier, at the very last minute, we're just really moving the payable from the original vendor to the supply chain finance provider, because that's who we eventually owe now. How they worked out a deal with whatever vendor we eventually owe, it was really kind of up to them. We always owe them on the due date. I know that was pretty fast for something maybe you haven't seen too much before, but again, for the folks that do supply chain financing, hopefully that made some sense. And hopefully this will add a significant amount of kind of automation to a process that might have been either custom development and or a lot of manual steps in the past. So we are about right at 45, which I think was the target for the.
Good job, Chuck. Kept us right on time. We have one question, Sunil's question. If my customer is upgrading from version 10 to version 11, do they have to review / change the file relocation? He asked this right before you started presenting supply chain.
No, we should have. The upgrade should handle swapping those over for you. So it'll just go from the module specific file relocation to that more generic electronic funds file relocation. Technically, customers could have had this issue even on just between direct debit and AP/EFT. This was just going to kind of make the problem much worse, which is why we went to this more central model for file relocation.
So I'm going to put you and Tina on the spot. I know nobody's asked this question, and I know you hate it when I do this, but if we look first at customer reimbursement for a partner that's implementing our core treasury automation suite, and they have a customer that's interested in customer reimbursement, we take care of the format and getting it to support customer reimbursement. Tina, do you have an idea of how many hours or how much work goes into adding that functionality? Is it kind of like testing a format with the bank and just configuring EFT based on what you've shown?
Yeah, so if they've already, yeah, so it is like APEFT, and especially if they've already tested APEFT, it's good. They just have to test to make sure that what they want included is being there. Yes, so.
All right, so no surprises there. Chuck, for bank to bank transfer, what do you say as far as hours to implement or what it looks like in comparison to what partners are used to implementing of SKGs?
Yeah, we're assuming that much of the time that they'd be using this bank-to-bank transfer, they probably already have that bank in play for maybe APEFT. So adding this on additionally would not be too difficult at all. It's the same sorts of screens that you have in APEFT. So there's a bank-to-bank transfer details screen, just like there's a vendor banking details screen. There's a little bit lesser really to set up because we don't have to worry about emails. So it's a little bit more straightforward. And the nice things with your bank accounts is since they're your bank accounts, you shouldn't really have a lot of problem with having like incorrect bank account numbers or that sort of thing that you might have with to deal with a vendor.
That's a fair point. What about supply chain financing?
Yeah, so supply chain finance is really pretty brand new, so we don't have a lot of roadmap, I should say a lot of history on time to implement there. But really, our format library just has a few items in it, so we'd want to make sure that whoever your provider is, if it's Wells or JP Morgan, or if it's a provider that we haven't used yet or whatever, that we know what two things we really just need to know: what the formats look like for any parts of the, I'll call it the dialogue, and then what their dialogue looks like. So for instance, two of them we did was Prime Revenue and SEB. Prime Revenue sends an acknowledgement file back. SEB does not send, or they both send an acknowledgement file back. Prime Revenue sends a settlement file back where SEB just assumes you're going to pay them on the due date. So it's really just conversations with those providers up front. What do those dialogues look like back and forth? How many dialogues are there back and forth, and what do the formats look like? The setup, though, I kind of went through all the setup screens. There's not a lot of setup screens to go through. It'd just be a matter of getting the right format in place and testing it.
Okay, I am going to share the last slide. Let me see here. I just need you to stop sharing, Chuck. And we still have questions coming in. So, oh no, that was just Sunil saying thank you. You're welcome, Sunil. If any partners have questions, I am going to just put up this last slide to again socialize the webinar dates that are coming, but feel free to post a question. We do have a few more minutes left before we kick you guys out. Good timing, Ron. Okay, can you provide a bank fabric teaser by answering one question? You've got Kevin and Tim on the line, so we'll see. Is an Azure VM still required with Bank Fabric as it is with Bank Communications Hub? I don't want to steal your thunder, Tim, Kevin.
No, it is not required anymore.
Ron, take the afternoon off, go celebrate, have yourself a cookie and a slice of cake. Yeah, so June 17th, we are going to talk through Bank Fabric, which we really think is the future of bank communications. We will still have the File Hub as an option, but moving forward, we will be presenting Bank Fabric as the default solution for customers to communicate with their bank securely without having to maintain the IT or the footprint in Azure with that File Hub, with that machine. So we're gonna be presenting that to you guys on June 17th. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can use that survey link, that sksoft.com/survey. That will be the primary content for the July 15th and July 29 sessions. We have had plenty of partners ask us about training, email us and email our support desk with questions. And so we want to give you guys the opportunity, if it's around AP automation that you've seen Tina present, if it's on AP payments, cash flow, that's what we're going to be covering on the July 15th session. And then the end of July will be all things accounts receivable, payment portals, customer payment processing, credit card processing, e-check. All of that will be covered in the AR session on July 29th. And we're really just, waiting for you guys to submit your questions using that survey. So it's not a detailed survey. You don't even need to put your email address in. You can fill it out anonymously. Send us your questions and ideas. And then again, a shameless plug for that June 17th session. We will primarily be focusing on the bank fabric solution, but then Tina and Chuck will actually be pitching ideas to you that our product committee is looking for some feedback from our partners on what do we do next with our roadmap and our product stack. We are just at time and I don't see anyone else posting any questions. So I'm going to let us go. You guys will receive a recording of this session. I do just ask a personal favor that since this is a partners only webinar, that you don't send the recording out to the customer market. Just keep it within your family of colleagues that work at your organization. But the recording will go out from Kelly here in the next day or two once it's published. And on behalf of everybody at SKG, we appreciate your partnership. We appreciate the hour that you spent with us today. I'm thanking you in advance for attending the June and July sessions. And again, if you have any questions for us, just feel free to reach out to the folks you know here at SK Global. Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Kelly, for putting this together for us. And we wish all of you a wonderful and safe afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.